Diagnosis podcast. We have our very first guest. He's going to jumpstart our year for 2025. And I'm really looking forward to the insight and wisdom that he's going to pour into us today. Here with us, we have L.A. Williams, our doctoral candidate and founder of Days by Design, LLC. He began his journey because education simply is expensive, and so is life. And he found himself often working several jobs, not finding the time for himself. Self care, maintaining social relationships are very important. And he decided that he was sick and tired of the grind, tired of struggling to find time for himself and to do anything that he loved. And so he began thinking of ways to solve his own problems. And now he helps others to do the same thing. A fun fact about LA is that he can play 7 instruments. And I am thoroughly fascinated by anybody that can do such a thing because that means your mind operates on a different spectrum than the regular world. And we will talk more about where you can locate and find him as we dive right into our interview. Okay, LA, welcome. Thank you for being with us today. We're so happy to have you. LA, for anybody who needs to know and should know, is a dear friend, brother of mine. It is such a blessing to have met him. I met him last year, and it has been a whirlwind just seeing his journey, watching him grow. I myself have learned a lot about time management, finding just intentionality in my day and how to really maximize the 24 hours that we all have. And I wanted to bring him to you all today because as caregivers, it is apropos for us to think of ourselves. We often feel like because we're caretaking, we should only be focused centrally on our loved ones. But what I learned from my own personal experience, and I'll share more context in a minute, is that if you don't take care of yourself first, if you don't start with you, you cannot pour from an empty cup. And as I mentioned in our intro, our friend LA is a doctoral candidate and he's going to school for physical therapy. He's always served people in the healthcare realm. And so he's marrying both of his gifts, talents, and skills in this arena. And to be a very profound and impactful and effective clinician, he has to be able to take care of himself first, or he's no good for anybody. We both work in clinical settings, and we know firsthand that you are at your best, at your peak, when you're able to care for others by caring for yourself first. So, first question we have for you, LA, is what inspired you to focus on helping graduate and career level individuals with time management? Was there a determining moment that led you to this path?
Yeah, I think for myself, partially it's just because it's a walk of life I'm very familiar with. That's the stage of life that I'm in. And like the concept of time management is something that can work for everybody from a grade schooler all the way up to a retiree. So having to narrow it down and just picking people that I know well is a good start. I know personally, I've had a lot of clients come to me and say like, I feel like there's so many things I want to do. They have a lot of ambition, but they're not totally sure where to like harness it and focus it. And as we walk through some of the parts of my program that can help them kind of like narrow down and funnel what they need to do into a short list of tasks that are executable and simple for them to not mess up by overthinking. That's kind of a big piece. And also kind of on the speaking to the caregiver side as well, is there's kind of an overthinking as well of having not enough time for yourself, or what am I going to do if I'm not with my spouse, my parent, my child? Like what am I supposed to be doing, right? And it's almost like a weird guilt thing there, and that kind of comes with the territory of the time management game, is that you feel like you're kind of like a FOMO on like your own potential if you're not like doing everything in the right order. But then on the other side of things, if you're not filling yourself up, you can't really effectively execute on those things. that you really want to do. So that kind of back and forth, that like angst that can be produced, is something I was wrestling with for a long time, because I was, either taking classes or doing a double shift or something. And I felt like there was more I could be doing, but I don't have the capacity to do anything else. So what am I supposed to do? I kind of feel like between a rock and a hard place. And
Absolutely. Glad you touched on those points because I just saw a post recently on Facebook about someone talking about survivor's guilt.
mhm,
And I'm like, look, you are doing enough. I know in my own journey, my dad, when he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, we were already frantic because we didn't know what the heck to do.
mhm,
We've had family members with cancer before, but he was, immediate. And so now we're like, okay, well, how do we do our schedules? What does dad need? And just constantly feeling like you were being pulled in multiple directions. And am I spending enough time? Are we creating memories? And
mhm,
I know for me personally, I didn't focus on any of that because I was so focused on not wanting to lose my dad, not wanting him to die. And so, I was in school, I worked 3 jobs, and I was all over the place, not knowing what to do with myself and not knowing where to put my time, where to how. And I wish I had someone like you at that time that helped me funnel and to bring it down and to be present and to
mhm.
be intentional.
And the hard part is, like you said, like a lot of those things you were struggling with were very real things. It's not like, oh, I'm lazy and
Yeah,
I need to be, or like I'm not very organized and need to be more productive. Like it's about shifting your focus toward a different like lens. And I think a lot of times people can get bogged down, folks I've talked to, where it's like you may be in a season where you're not going to have a bunch of free time. And most people don't have a lot of free time. I know my schedule is kind of ridiculous most of the time, but even if you have like more space, it doesn't mean you necessarily have the mental or emotional capacity to be doing other things, with your current situation. And those variables that are like contributing to that situation aren't easily movable. Like my loved one is going to require like around the clock care for at least 3 months if their tests remain the same, they haven't been changing. Or, I need to work these extra shifts because I need to pay for these loans, or I need to do research on finding, a specialist for the person I need, right? These are problems that need to be solved. And I think you can almost kind of fall into like an idealized thinking of, if only this was different. If only I had this extra time, or God forbid they weren't sick or things like that. I mean, and it's very simple and easy to go, I just wish that if this wasn't that case. But I mean, the first step of my program, what I've been helping people through, is like, hey, listen, we gotta just reckon with the reality of where we're at first. And there's some things that we can change, some things we can't, but we can have that conversation. But remembering, like, hey, we're in a hard spot here. We're struggling not because you're not trying. I think
absolutely.
that's something that a lot of people need to hear.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. That's something that I try to affirm a lot of family caregivers and caretakers in often is that you are already doing enough.
Mm,
Just your presence alone with your loved one is enough because they just need to know that somebody's there, somebody's with them,
yeah.
somebody's walking with them. It's scary, right? Like this is a completely life altering circumstance and situation, and everybody's having to adapt and adjust quickly. Especially with pancreatic cancer, you're up against the clock. It's a very aggressive cancer. And so you tend to forget where the priority should lie with time and what you should focus on because
Mhm,
essentially you're in the fight of your life trying to help your loved one live as they are in the fight of their lives, right? And so as you touched on that, it made me think about, the next question I wanted to ask you, which is when you think about intentional time management, What does that actually look like in practice? And can you share an example?
Yeah, yeah. You use in the intro, you use the word maximize, and I like to add a little bit of nuance to that word because I like it. I think it's an accurate word, but I think people use it in different contexts.
Mm,
I, maximizing time management, in my perspective, isn't about like making every second of your day maximally productive because we're not robots. We have needs and we have non-productive needs as well. We got to be able to breathe. We have to have morale, right? If you're trying to take care of your loved one and you're in the dumps all the time, that's going to rub off on them because your parents, your children, your spouse, no one wants to be a burden.
yeah.
And if they're perceived that way, kind of in a catch-22, like
Yeah.
the harder you work and, even if they may be burdensome, they do need care, right? Doesn't mean you're not willing to do that, but people hate being perceived that way, and maximizing time for me is about understanding how much time you do have and then what is the best way to spend it.
Mm,
Like you could spend the morning after you get them dressed, fed, washed, that deal. After they're settled, you could spend the morning pacing back and forth, trying to, understand or make sure the schedule's all squared away, running around, making sure this, that, and the third, or you could spend time with them, right? And now this is like easier said than done. Some things need to be done, and that's why it's a real problem. That's why it's a real difficult struggle for a lot of families, and young professionals to a less dramatic extent, as it comes to like their professional goals and things like that. I think that's kind of the hard part for a lot of people because when you hear like time management specialist or something like that, you think of like 10 productivity hacks to maximize your day. And those are helpful, most certainly. But I think it's a context of heart posture. Are you familiar? Yeah. So for those who may or may not know, listening, heart posture is you could have two people doing the exact same thing. For example, shoveling an elderly neighbor's lawn or driveway. One guy is doing it because they're older and they might slip and fall, and he's trying to make sure that his neighbor is safe. The other one, right next to him, he's shoveling so that he can make his neighbor across the street look bad because he's helping this old lady shovel her front lawn. Both of them are doing the exact same thing. And if you drove down the street, you'd see two guys helping out an old lady. How nice are they? But if you look inside, they're doing completely different things. So again, with being intentional with your time, it's a heart posture of like, I understand that sick or not, I only have so much time with my loved ones. I only have so much time in the day, and worry will help nothing, unfortunately.
I tell people often, I'm like, I spent so much time worrying
Hmm.
during my dad's treatment journey that I actually have memory gaps,
Mm.
and I have to work hard to think about what actually happened that year because I spent so much time fearful. My anxiety, I already had issues with anxiety, but that year it just was through the roof.
Right. Right.
And I always tell them, bring yourself down.
Mm.
You have to anchor yourself, get yourself grounded because you want to make sure that you remain as present as possible. And I often remind them, and I like that you define the maximization part of it and understanding of it because we're not superheroes. I know we would love to be. Like,
Yeah.
who doesn't have a favorite one? I often would like to think I was Wonder Woman or Superman on a good day. But but the thing is that I'm not. Like you said, we need to maintain a morale. It's okay to have some non-productive activity going on in your life. And frankly, your loved one is going to appreciate that. Do they like to read books? Do they want to paint? Do they love movies? Are they fans of cinema? Like, switch up what the time looks like. It should
Mhm.
not. Caregiving is already challenging. It can already be a very depressing state of being. You got to mix it up. And I believe that intentionality, as you so beautifully and eloquently state that, like you said, is a heart posture.
Mhm.
You know, what is your reason for doing this in the first place?
Right.
You know, and so it puts things into perspective about a mindset and an attitude we should have first,
Mhm.
and to let that govern our day to day. And I think that that's something important. Something that I love that you offer to your clients is time auditing. And this idea of actually taking a look at what your day, week, and month consists of. And now that you have a loved one, um, that's about to change drastically. How would you educate people to approach a time audit in such a time sensitive circumstance?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really important and powerful skill. So for those of you who aren't familiar, a time audit is a very simple process of just documenting what you do throughout the day. For example, it could look like at 7:15 you woke up, at 7:25 you got out of bed, went to brush your teeth, that took 2 minutes, 7:27, now you're going over to get your lunch, so on and so forth. So it can be a bit of a tedious process, but when you get to the end of it, you can do as little as a couple days. If you have a very regimented schedule, it's all the same kind of thing. Or I like to do up to 2 weeks because my schedule can be a little bit variable. I have different days off and things like that. So um, having that understanding of what is it I did today. Because most people don't know. If you ask what you had yourself for breakfast last week, last Tuesday, most people aren't going to know. What is it that you're doing? Where are you spending your time? And with this tool, you can make inferences. Okay, well, I'm spending a lot of time just like on my phone, just scrolling. Is that something that I really want to be doing? Or in a more practice to a lot of the folks probably listening to this, like I spent 4 hours just looking at the schedule for the next month of appointments, just trying to make everything fit, right? Now, in that example, you probably should be doing that, but having an understanding of where this time is going and where you're spending it and where you're misspending it is the first step in really kind of turning that corner of, okay, well, I can better spend it this way and that way. I understand that, okay, well, if I take Fifth Street to the dialysis appointment, it takes 40 minutes longer because of traffic.
Hmm.
So then if I change this route, maybe it'll be a little bit faster. I understand that on this time, my loved one's really groggy at this time, so maybe I should shift conversations and important discussions toward a later part of the day, that kinds of stuff. It kind of helps you really, really reorganize your day into such a way that you're making educated decisions on your time versus just, okay, well, I have a free hour here, I can put that there. And okay, well, this just came up, I got to make sure we go here. Oh no, now we're out of milk. Now we're kind of reactionarily interacting with our day. And if they're anything like me, that just breeds anxiety. So it could be something you could talk a lot about, but it's a pretty simple practice that has a lot of really practical application pieces if you really commit to it.
Absolutely, I agree. And to all of our listeners, I encourage you, if you're wondering, when do I start that? Right away. As soon as your loved one receives their diagnosis, or even before that, actually, because typically they'll run a scan. From the scan, if they find a mass on the pancreas, they'll determine that they need to biopsy that mass. So within that time frame, start looking at your schedule and just begin deciding on, as LA said, okay, what does my day look like moment by moment, just in one day. Just start with one day, and then go from there. When my dad got his diagnosis, he told us the result. We had to wait a period of time for his stent placement, and then we had to wait for a period of time of when his actual chemo treatments would start. So once we understood when his chemo would start, we knew, okay, he's going to be 2 weeks on, 1 week off, 2 weeks on, 1 week off. That gives you a 3 week time span. So within that 3 week time span, we had to determine how our day was going to go. Like I said, we didn't have an expert like LA around, so we didn't know to do a time audit and to be intentional. So we were just kind of tossing things, where we had some free time and doing what we could. I like I said, I was in school at the time and working 3 jobs, so I was always more so in the evenings with my dad. But as you shared that, it brought back a memory that I was being intentional in the morning with my dad and didn't realize it. Something that my dad always did was call the whole family early in the morning because he's an early riser.
Mhm.
On my way to school, we would talk on the phone and
Mm.
have beautiful and intentional conversations on my way to school. And so I encourage you to even think about what do you and your loved one already do together that you already have in your time that you didn't realize was already intentional, and
Mm.
keep that a part of your regular schedule. That way, going back to guilt, now you don't have guilt feeling like, I don't have, where am I? How are we making memories? How are we?
Mm.
Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. Audit your day. Really look at it, and then build it out from there. So start as soon as possible is what I would recommend. And so with that, I want to know, how can caregivers make long-term goals for something that seems like it robs you of time?
Mm.
Because a lot of our caregivers experience, like we have some where, you know, they might only get a month after diagnosis with their loved one. They may get 2 or 3 months, some may get a year. So how can we be better at setting long-term goals even though time may not be on us?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and it has a couple different layers to it. And it can be very simple for somebody on the outside to go, oh, well, you know what? Just be more intentional with your time. Have yourself a little craft day, take the time you can. And, that's not always the easiest thing because there's a lot of emotions. There's a lot of feelings, many of which you feel like you can't express with your loved one because it might make things worse. There's some, and then there's feelings of isolation and things like that. And it can be very easy to throw your hands up and get very overwhelmed. And I think the core of being intentional with your time is just being acutely aware that this is a finite resource that we have. And even if your worries and concerns and anxieties are wholly based in logic, completely valid you're feeling this way. You're not crazy. No one thinks you're crazy. It still doesn't mean that that anxiety is productive, which is really hard to hear and hard to say. My grandfather had Alzheimer's, and that is a very slow and agonizing process, and it can be very when I hear that, as I'm really speaking to myself because I remember like I was not doing that. When you're in this moment, you're just swamped with anxiety. You're just trying to, talk to him, and it's not really him anymore, and all these, you know, emotions that make it very easy to just get really sad and really frustrated and really worried. Right? These are all normal things, but when it comes to like just being more intentional and finding that time when there may not be many is just understanding that this person in front of you, this person that you love, is here now. You know, you can look into their eyes, you can see the universe if you look hard enough. And rooting yourself in that nothing's gonna stay the same ever. Anything. The only constant in life is change. And having that time with them, even just holding their hand, having a cup of coffee with them in the morning, making fun of them for how they walk, fun stuff like that. Just having that time with them, even if it's small, you know, because on the other side of it, I feel like a lot of people feel like, well, everything needs to be a moment. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. It can just be going to the grocery store, but you're going to the grocery store together. And it's funny, really, because every sense we have, hearing, smell, taste, touch, all that stuff, they only work by detecting changes in your environment.
Mm,
And like, so you actually cannot perceive things when they don't change. So,
that's profound.
but we hate change so much because it's hard to predict and you can't plan around change. But you know, hopefully some of the stuff we've talked about, we'll continue to talk about, will help people understand that you can plan around change and be able to work on the fly.
Thank you for that. That was really profound. And you touched on quite a few things that I want to expound upon. Um, One thing I want to say to families is that we're not God. We cannot control the outcome of the matter. But what we can control is what we do with the time that we have. And everything that LA just said, those are actionable goals. Those are goals to set. One thing that we both learned working in the clinic is helping patients to not only articulate but actualize what their goals are. For
Mm,
example, have a patient come in and they say to us, we just want to be able to play with our grandkids. We want to be able to pick them up. We want to be able to hold them. We want to be able to run a marathon again. I was a marathon runner. I want to be able to walk around the mall with my kids and not get winded and my knees not be in pain or my shoulder not hurt or whatever the injury or condition be. And so, as a caregiver, I would encourage you to set goals around what LA just mentioned. Do you just want to be able to walk around the the store together? I want to go on a trip with my loved one. I want to go to the movies with them. I want to host a gathering and just bring the family all together. Keep those as goals. Don't make it about the outcome you're dreading.
mm,
'Cause- and the reason why I say that is because I actually know a lot of survivors. One of the myths of pancreatic cancer is that it's not beatable. But I know survivors who have beat this thing. And when you keep goals in mind that are centered around living and being fulfilled, and we're going to go into that next, you realize that you can actually fight this thing and make each day worth something because now it's filled with purpose. And so, LA, I want to segue into how would you define a fulfilled life and how can managing our time better bring someone closer to that vision?
yeah, I mean, it's a question people have been asking for a super long time, and you know, given the line of work that I'm in currently, it's something that I feel like a lot of people are either actively trying to answer or without knowing it, trying to find the answer. And I think In part, this may deflate the question slightly, I apologize, but in part, it's kind of asking the wrong question of like, what are the things I need to do in order to have this fulfilled thing, right? And because life, like our schedules and our loved ones, is so varied, there's so many different things. I love music. If I had more time, I have a list of 20 more instruments I'd like to have and learn because they're super neat. That'd be super cool. I also would love to be a clinician and help people. I also want to see all the national parks. People are complicated. And I think um the weight of that question can pull away from what it's really trying to ask. Like how can I live a life? How can I actually contribute to the world around me in a way that's meaningful, positive, and fulfilling? Right? Not having that answer is a scary place to be because you want all of those things. Um, and I think there isn't just one answer. It's really the pursuit of finding it is how you get. I was always told that if you want to do something, run as hard as you can in that direction, and the universe will turn you around if you're running the wrong way.
Mm.
And it can be very easy not to. And be like, no, 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 that has to be this. I have to do this in this order. If I can get these goals done by this date, I can get to this next step. And it can be very regimented. And counterintuitively, that's not really how our lives work. It's messy and confusing, and growth is nonlinear, and all of these things. And so I would say to somebody who's, struggling with feeling fulfilled or wondering how they can fulfill their loved ones' lives is sit down with yourself and ask them or yourself, what is it exactly that you want out of life, right? What exactly is it that brings you joy? And how, statistically speaking, most people find the most joy when helping others, has the most amount of positive effect on your brain. How can this thing that you want the most positively impact those around you? And it could be a big, fancy dream, or it could be a small dream. I want to open a hair shop and get people's hairs braided under 3 hours because that takes so long. Yeah, I couldn't. I couldn't know personally, but I've heard it's quite the process.
Yeah. A lot of prayer and patience to get the hair braided to do
There you go. Yeah, yeah, and I think it is really tragic in Western society in general that we've really kind of gotten really in the next best thing and trying to keep up with the Joneses and all of these different avenues in which you can be fulfilled, be successful, have a lot of relationships, have like a bunch of influence and all that stuff. And I think the scary part, one of the many scary parts about getting a serious diagnosis like pancreatic cancer or any other serious illness is that a lot of that keeping up with the Joneses becomes very trivial, but it's very hard to feel that because you've been doing it your entire life. So it's like you almost get like a cognitive dissonance between what you need to be doing for your loved one and what is actually important. And but I have to do this and I have to do that. And they would really like it if this happened, right? And I've seen people kind of for really struggle with that back and forth.
I honestly couldn't agree more because the only thing my dad wanted to do was go on a walk, get on the golf course, be able to preach and sleep.
Mm,
He wanted to be able to do those things and, of course, spend time with his family. Most of the time, my dad would just be like, Let's watch a documentary together. He loved Nat Geo Wild, Discovery Channel, so he would turn that on. He also was a huge sports fan because he was an athlete himself. So he loved basketball season. That was his favorite thing. So we would watch sporting games together. We watch football together. And like you said, it can either be real big or it can be real small, but either way, it's important.
Hmm.
And I like that you explain the weightiness and emphasize the weightiness of the question, because people often ask outside of the illness, what is my purpose? Am I really, being fulfilled? And things are not what fulfills
Mm.
at all. It really is about first knowing who you are, remaining self-aware. Who are you outside of caregiving? Which, let me give a full disclaimer and warning. Please do not make caregiving your identity, because
Mm.
once your loved one passes on and transitions from this life to the next, you will find yourself spiraling trying to figure out what to do now that they're not physically present on earth anymore. And so
Mm.
I do want to warn, our listeners of that, to not take this on as an identity like your cloak, because even Clark Kent took his cape off.
Mm.
He wasn't always Superman. So, you know, don't don't make whatever you do, whether it's your job, career, whatever it is, that is like LA said, we are complex, we are varied. There's so many aspects to who we are as a person that make us who we are. So tap into all of those things wherever you are in this season of life. I'm a dancer. I would love to be dancing. Right now, I don't exactly have the time for that, and that's okay, because I've found fulfillment in other ways, things that make me happy in other ways, until I can get back to that. So, um, a fulfilled life has to be garnered by you understanding who you are and tapping into the various aspects. And I love that you emphasize that, tapped into that, because I think that's very important for any caregiver. And I think with that in mind, you've already tapped into that already. But what would you say, because you do work with high achieving individuals? I see that in caregiving as well, where everything has to be like this marker of achievement for
Caregiving is
success.
a high achieving thing, for sure.
Right. No. And so, what would you say is a common misconception that you've seen about productivity?
I see most often is that people want Rome to be built in a day more than anything else, because it's very clear, especially for a lot of the folks that I've seen, where they know exactly what they want to do, exactly what they want to do. I want to do this, and then I'll do this one more thing, and all these different priorities jumble around in their head, and they get overwhelmed and burn out. Right? It can be very simple to jump into that mindset of I know I need to get these appointments done. I know I need to get this like infrastructure built into my house, these new guardrails, whatever it may be. I know I need to make the house handicap accessible now. All of these things are all important. It can overflow and overwhelm and continue. I'm getting anxious just describing the example. It's not even my problem.
Right.
Putting first things first is the only thing you can do. How do you get across town without a car? You gotta walk. And you can't think about your destination if you're not taking the active steps to get there. And so a lot of the things I'll end up seeing some people down walking them through is, okay, what is everything you want to do? What's your big goal? What's everything you can think of that would get you there? And organize them into three categories. What you got to do first, what opportunities may come up in the future that you might want to pursue, what be the easiest to do, and what would be the hardest, either emotionally time wise, physically, whatever, right? There might be overlap between some of those three, but from that, picking number one, what you have to do. And I understand in the caregiving lifestyle, there's a lot of things you have to do and a lot of things you have to do first. And that's where it can be very difficult. And that's where support comes in. And for those who don't have support outside of their family unit, you have a wonderful person right here. She's got you.
What you do. Just look, I get it. It feels like anvil has fallen on top of you, and you're like, what is going on? And you're trying to process that while trying to put the first thing first. My dad used to always say, let the main thing be the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the main thing is, you got to stay focused on that. And the shocking thing is that my dad actually helped us get reeled in. He
Mm-hmm.
was like, wait a minute. His main thing was, will I be able to preach and teach? I got to still serve my people. That was what was on my dad's mind. And his oncologist was like, yeah, we'll hook it up and make sure you can still serve your people. And because that was my dad's mindset, it reeled us in as a family. And it was like, all right, because my dad off top was like, I'm a survivor. Like, don't put me in the grave. I ain't dead. I said, you know what, you're right. And as caregivers, again, warning you guys, don't do that to your loved one. I know it causes anxiety. I know you're fearful. It's like, oh my God. If you put them into a grave that they're not in, it's actually gonna speed up an outcome you don't want.
Mm-hmm.
So as LA said, you know, what needs to be done right away that matters, but still live, because that's what this fight is about. It's about living, and taking advantage of what we do have. And what we do have within us control is ourselves. I know that I've had to learn a lot of lessons about my own struggles with managing time. And over the past year, I've grown a lot in thinking about what's the main thing? What does my day to day look like moment by moment? What's actually important that I should spend my time doing? And then some days I'm like, what's important right now is for me to reset, to refresh. So some days I'll take a moment. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna watch my favorite movie. I'm gonna read a couple pages of a book I've been wanting to get to. I'm gonna spend time talking to my family on the phone. I'm gonna have conversations with my friends. I'm gonna go for a walk around my neighborhood. I'm gonna stop in the park and just take in the scenery. Like, sometimes those are the main things. And you
Self-regulatory
know,
activities are huge.
exactly. You have to self-regulate.
And it's not a small problem in the slightest. And I mean, if I could even re-answer the misconception, is that I feel like everybody's mind says, what more can I do? How can I do it? But very few think about how can I refill and refocus. And it's very easy to stop thinking about yourself, especially as a caregiver. But if you don't have those um, places to refill, and you're not going to be able to do what you have to do. It's just not going to be possible. There's just too many things. And if you don't have a cup to fill, I mean, they actually did research at Stanford a few years ago. Where they looked at cortisol levels. For those who don't know, that's a stress hormone. Back in the day when we were running from lions, it was like you'd have a quick shoot of cortisol, you'd be able to get away from the lion, you'd be okay. But extended exposures to cortisol have negative impacts on your skin. It gets really dry. Your muscles begin to atrophy, and it can even like lead to osteoporosis. And like long enough effects, it actually takes up and eats away the calcium in your bones. Scary stuff. And they did this study with women, mothers with children who had severe disability. So they were doing caregiving for long periods of time. And they found that this extended stress, because that's stressful, led to telomeres, the little caps on the ends of their DNA fraying. And that has a bunch of negative health effects. It's not great. It's terrible for longevity, that kind of thing. But they found what the study was is they had a bunch of women in this state situation in their life, a bunch of caregivers. They get together once a week and they have a support group. And they just talk about it. And this would help trigger what's called telomerase, which helps re-establish those caps on the ends of your DNA.
Mm.
There is a scientific backing to having support. It's huge for your health. And you can't be an effective caregiver if you're falling apart yourself.
Mm.
Much easier said than done. I know, I know, I know, I know, I know.
I know. Yeah.
But it is actually life or death important that you find your support, you find your help. Take breaks because you need them, because you need them. And building a community is so, so important. That's another misconception about productivity, I'd say.
The gem that you just dropped. And for anybody who's like, what in the world? I know we just got sciencey right there, but as he just described, they're caps on your DNA. You know, DNA is two strands. And one thing I remember learning, I believe it was in abnormal psychology, that you can pass down the stress you carry in your DNA to the next generation.
Absolutely insane. Yeah.
Right? It's mind blowing. So I encourage you, like LA said, it's easier said than done, but it also comes down to a choice.
Hmm.
What decision are you going to make for your life for the sake of your loved one's life? And I actually want to know, what would you say are three major lessons you learned in your journey to becoming more intentional with time and how you spend
I mean, they're going to sound really simple, but I'm real stubborn. So it's hard for me to learn them. One is that Rome was not built in a day. And that most of life's problems aren't ones that need to be solved. They're ones that need to be managed and controlled.
it? Mm.
Two, this is kind of like a concept that I learned a lot more about. And going into detail would be a whole separate podcast, but understanding yourself and what your response to stress is. Because we're animals, first and foremost. And if you put yourself in a stressful situation, you will react both mentally and physiologically. And understanding those warning signs can be the first step is knowing, okay, I need to take a break. Because for me personally, I can feel it. There's a knot right at the base of my sternum, and I get real jittery. It's like, all right, I need to go. I need to go right now. Knowing where that line is, because a lot of us can push through that, especially if you're a caregiver, you're a tough, loving, compassionate person. You can push through just about anything. But just because it's possible does not mean it's good for you.
Yeah.
So learning that line was a huge one. And then the last one, like I said, is understanding the importance and value of support and community. Because humans we're not meant to be isolate. We're not meant to be islands. And so many things in our bodies and in our brains, supported by science, begin to break down when we're isolated and alone.
Well, LA, before we wrap up today, I want to go through a quick fire round and ask you some fun questions. First question is, what's your go-to coffee order?
Ooh, yes, that would be a large Americano with peppermint.
Ooh,
Yeah, I live in a pretty good coffee town, so I've been pampered recently.
that sounds absolutely delightful. Oh my goodness. Peppermint in anything just sounds like a time, especially if it's in tea.
Tis the
Me
season.
per Yeah, it's the season for sure. Now, me personally, because I'm not a coffee drinker, but I do love me a good hot. Thai tea.
Mm.
It
Yes,
just
ma'am.
it just really gets it going with some extra cinnamon,
Mm.
nutmeg tossed in there, and it just does a girl good during the holiday season. So if you're a coffee drinker, play that back and try out LA's order. Would you be a barista and make some at home for yourself?
I would, but at home, I'm very much, I can just do black coffee at home. I have no problem with that.
Really?
If I
Didn't
go
know
to a place, I'll get something fancy because I can't make that at home. But I'll just do that. If I'm feeling real fancy, I'll put some half and half in there. But yeah, I'm a pretty
that.
simple guy when it comes to that stuff.
Okay, and then next question, what app can't you live without?
Google Calendar, full stop. I look at that probably about 50 times a day at least.
My DPT has this saying, if it ain't on the calendar, it didn't happen yet. Because
Yeah.
especially if you are trying not to double book, Google Calendar will be your bestie.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Last quick fire round question is team digital planner or old school paper?
I'd go digital because you can customize colors a lot more effectively with less supplies and it's free. So,
I personally go for both. I like to have things in multiple places
mhm.
because I'm just too forgetful. I'm like you, my schedule is always,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God. Even for me, it gets overwhelming. So I like to have things in multiple places. I also am a tactile learner. So if I didn't physically feel myself write it down, it is not locked in. So I have to do
Mhm.
multiple areas of uh, keeping everything in a place where I can see it and get access to it. So I am team both. I love digital because it's writing in hand, right where you need it, but I love old school for memory purposes. So thank you so much, LA, for joining us. We look forward. I can't wait to invite you back. I know you're going to have more gems to share with us. You can find LA on Instagram at Round to Wellness. That is Round to Wellness, TO, not TWO. And I highly encourage you all to follow him. I also encourage you to make sure that you share this episode with someone because he, like I said, he helps high achieving professionals, people like ourselves, people like you who have careers, but you want to know how to, manage your time better. And as you said, you need a community. And sometimes you just need a real good coach. I know we like to think that we can just do things ourselves and things seem so simple, but coaching helps you to see what you can't see. I have several different coaches that I have invested in, and I'm so grateful to them. And as I said, I have learned and garnered insight and wisdom from LA myself that has helped me to be better in how I manage my time, to be more intentional, to time audit. And it has made the world of difference in my day and how I come down off of a high with whatever I'm doing during the day. So, like I said, I encourage you to follow him and make sure that you share this with someone who also would need his coaching and assistance so that we can all be better together. That's what that's fulfillment is us being better together in a society that seems a little dark at times. So thank you again, LA. If you have any final words for our listeners.
Yeah. Today is called the present because it's a gift.
Amen to that. We will see you all soon and thank you so much for joining Beyond the Dice.